Hey, Andrea Fitzpatrick of Wise Life Coaching and Consulting. So I want to share with you a bit of a story and some useful tools today. All right? If you have a little one with special needs or learning differences, there's so much you can do to help them. My favorite tool is neuroplasticity. That being stated, it is not by far the only tool in the toolbox. There's SLP, speech language pathology, there's OT, occupational therapy, there's PT, physical therapy, there's color therapy, there's music therapy, there is sensory flooding, there's birdsong, there is cognition, there is working on metacognition, there is tapping into the autonomic system. There are so many tools. And I'm barely skimming the surface. I'm just catching some of the big ones that you can utilize to help your little one. Now, one of the things I want to speak into today is language. When you're thinking about your little one and speech language therapy, say you've got someone that's nonverbal or someone who is not speaking well, think back, if you can, about how you learned language, or if you have a sibling, or maybe you're an auntie or an uncle. Think about how those children learn language compared to the little one in your life that has a language delay. One of the things that isn't necessarily talked about when we start talking about doing speech therapy is how we learn language, okay? And part of that how is that we are exposed to it every single day in a multitude of ways and situations. That's how we learn language intimately. That's how we learn language as children. If you have someone with learning differences or a child with learning delays, you can expect reasonably for their language to just fly with only 1, 2 to 3 half-hour sessions in a week. It's nowhere near enough. So for those of you that wish to really make a difference in your child's life, you need to be willing to dedicate at least a half hour of your day to sit down time with your child working language and working sound very specifically. And there's a lot of exercises for that I can provide. But the point is that you can bring this right into the home, and you can also bring it into your normal speech patterns. You don't have to wait for that appointment with an SLP, okay? And SLPs are great. I'm not at all disregarding their work. What I'm saying is that we as parents and educators, if we want our children to leap and grow, we've got to be able to show up and bring those things into the home place. I have on my wall a cartoon character from one of my boys' SLPs, and it's slow-mo, fast dash, and the kitty cat that gets it just right. Okay, and those are just ways of exemplifying how we can talk too fast, and when we talk too fast, it isn't very clear, and then there's slow-mo, obviously, right? And then the cat who gets it just right, Katina cat. And there's a ton of ways that you can get really playful with this, and I know I sure did. And my little boy has sisters, so they started picking up on my speech patterns naturally, like little ones without learning differences will do, and started parroting me. So my son was getting a triple dose in our home, which was wonderful, right? But the point is that it's not too difficult once you have the tools to start executing that. Now, the real trick I wanna put out there is that some of us parents, especially when we're knee deep in it and just figuring things out, kind of panic at the idea of bringing one more thing in, right? One more thing is overwhelming. One of the things I do with my methodology when I'm working with people is I teach you how to either replace things or to incorporate those tools into your day-to-day life that you're already living, so that it isn't an extra, it isn't an overwhelm, it becomes a way of life. That's part of the reason for my son's success. It's a way of life. You know, I bring in SLP throughout the day. I don't leave it to just the speech therapy sessions. I also don't necessarily sit down with him for a half hour. I have, absolutely, I have, and early on I definitely did. Now it's more of like 2 to 3 minute increments that probably add up to a lot more than a half hour throughout the day in just little exchanges that we do, right? And it's the same with OT and PT and things like that. You can incorporate all those things in the neuroplasticity tools I teach. You can incorporate all these things into your way of life, and I can show you how to do that so that it isn't so overwhelming, and so that when you do make that, either when you make that initial appointment with the actual therapist, they're going to be amazed, or when you start showing up with your little one and your little one's performing better, they're going to be amazed, right? The ability of our brain to pick up information and store it and utilize it is amazing. Now, one of the things that really happens, especially with kiddos with sensory overwhelm, which happens with sensory processing challenges, sometimes sensory processing challenges can kind of happen on their own. Sometimes they're taglined with something like cerebral palsy, and they're also really common with autism. Now, one of the things that I see missed fairly frequently when we're dealing with sensory processing challenges, regardless of what diagnosis it's tied to, is that it works a little bit like short-term memory interference. So when you're teaching your little one, they may not be able to give it right back to you if there's a lot going on. It's really important to find that quieter, more focused space to teach them. Because they're filtering so much with their senses, it's hard for them to actually take in all the information, right? So what I'm trying to convey here is that if you're working with someone who has some of those sensory processing challenges, which is really likely if you're working with, obviously, if you're working with somebody with sensory processing challenge, but it's also really likely if you're working with someone with cerebral palsy or autism as well, that they're going to have some of that sensory overwhelm, right? And so when you're working with that little one, it's really important to remember and just pace yourself to, number one, slow down, because when you go too fast, the brain literally cannot learn. So really slow down and bring some presence to it. It doesn't mean you have to talk like a dummy, right? It's just a matter of slowing down and showing up. And the more subtle you can be and precise you can be, the more you teach that little one's brain to notice the detail, to notice the subtlety, which is all part of neuroplasticity training, right? And when the brain starts to notice those things, it starts to click and line up, right? And so, and also when you keep it quiet and focused like that, they don't have to sort through so much sensory data to take in the information. If they have to sort through the sensory data, it's going to take them longer to learn whatever it is you're teaching. It doesn't mean they're dumb. Never, ever believe that they're dumb or that they're slow or that there's a brain delay. Quite contrary, actually. They're just filtering so much because they don't have a way to filter out the sound in the same way a neurotypical brain will. They're filtering out so much with their senses that they can't take in the data as easily as a neurotypical brain would. So you either have to, number one, slow down, and quiet down and be subtle. Get them in a focused space, right? A quieter learning space. Or be willing to be repetitive in what you're teaching and patient. Repetitive and patient. They're not dumb. Their brain's very smart. It's just that their brain is on overload. Okay, their brain is on overload most of the time. And because of that, it makes it harder for them to learn. Okay, and I really can't overemphasize that. They're not cognitively delayed. How they learn is different because their brain is just dialed up. They're what I call the super sensitive of our population. And unfortunately, that gets put into a box as not a good thing or not a healthy thing, and I tend to disagree with that. It can be difficult in our society, because our society can be so hurried and so frantic and so, get to this, get to that, And we have so much interference with all of, pick any town, anywhere USA as an example, any town. Unless it is spit small, and even the spit small ones, you have how many screens in a typical household in a day, just how many screens, just that as an example. And all those screens are disruptive to the brain lining up and organizing. When you have too much picture and data coming at you, when you have too much lights and flashing sound, when you have too much visual stuff going on, too much sensory processing stuff coming in at you, light, sound, texture, feeling, wind, you name it. For those that are highly sensitive, it's harder to filter those things out. And in my work, I find that kiddos with cerebral palsy, sensory processing challenges, and autism often have a more difficult time of filtering those things out than the neurotypical person would. And that's not a deficiency, it's a sensitivity, right? Not a deficiency, a sensitivity. So I hope this is helpful to some of you out there. I'm going to start working here to post more regularly here on the YouTube channel, and you will also find shorter posts on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, working to provide more learning tips, tools, and tricks for those of you that are interested. If there's something specific I've touched upon that interests you, shoot me an email or a direct message. I'll be watching all of the above, and I will see what I can do to answer your question. I kind of have the model, ask me anything. If I don't know, I'm sure I can find the answer, kind of thing. But I'm also pretty confident in what I do know. So I'm really hoping to be of service and to help. And again, like I said, if you have questions, reach out anytime. So my name's Andrea Fitzpatrick. I'm of Wise Life Coaching and Consulting. Basically a special needs education consulting coach. I basically help you parents and educators communicate and work with atypical neurology better. It's been a bit tough to come up with that title. Anyway, have a wonderful day and shoot me a message if you got questions. Thanks.